Goeiedag! Good day, fellow South Africans and citizens of the world.
I've been looking around for salvation. I've been looking around for the truth. All around me I see frustration, and I looked all over till I found you. I sit and listen to your stories, and you're telling me, please don't worry. Lot in this world you should know, and love in life is where you should go. If you're looking for somewhere to go, if you're looking for someone to know, if you're looking for someone to guide you, then love in life will guide you.
Goeienaand, good evening, fellow South Africans and citizens of the world, and welcome to tonight's live stream. And of course tonight we're talking about a subject which we've never talked about before here on Loving Life, which is torture, but in particular the perpetrators of torture. And my guest tonight is Elaine, who's a psychiatrist, or a psychologist I should say, and has very, very interesting insights into this whole subject, and especially as it relates to pre-1994. So without any further ado, I'm going to get Elaine Bing on, and let's get the conversation started. Here we go.
It's husband. She's just gone to the bathroom. She'll be here now.
Right, not a problem.
Yes, she is.
Okay.
Sorry.
That's okay, Elaine, not a problem.
I'm back.
Okay. Can we just get your camera on?
Isn't it on? It should be.
Not yet.
Oh, right. Gary didn't answer it properly. Let me just do that. There we are.
Still can't.
It should
There you
go
are.
on now.
No, then now I see you. That's better. That's
Yeah,
better.
no, she-
No,
There goes the
isn't that perfect timing? Load shedding.
Yeah.
Now, just as well you got a plan B. Now, we're going to be talking about torture tonight, and in particular, the perpetrators of torture. And before we get into that, I'd love to know how you became involved in what is a really macabre area, isn't it?
It's actually quite bad. I haven't looked at this stuff actually for quite a long time. Probably a little bit of self-protection along the way. Because when I was working with it, it didn't bother me that much. You get habituated to almost anything. But what had happened was, I'm a psychologist, and I had just coincidentally seen a lot of men whom I suspected had been involved in perpetration. And it sort of developed from there. It's quite interesting because people don't speak about perpetration easily, and generally I think we as a profession prefer not to go there. But little bit by little bit, I sort of started realizing that they'd been involved in various activities that were problematic, and then eventually decided, well, if it is there, I might as well research it, which is what eventually happened.
Right. Now, when you talk about perpetrators, we're talking about largely people who tortured others under the apartheid regime, aren't we?
Those are the people that I did work with. Obviously, torture is far more widespread than that. I think it's endemic in many, many areas in the world. I mean, it took us forever to ratify the Convention Against Torture, and we're not the only ones it took forever. The Americans, if you remember, were talking about rendition. It's torture. Or they talked about what? Enhanced interrogation.
And waterboarding?
Yeah, enhanced interrogation they refer to it as. It's called torture in other language.
Mm.
But something there that's quite interesting that I didn't bring in, but I can mention it now, is the number of psychiatrists and psychologists that were involved in that whole process with the US. The APA, American Psychiatric Association, were involved. They apologized a bit sooner than the American Psychological Association.
So they were participants?
Yeah, they helped the regime.
Oh, wow.
They told them, how far they can go.
Wow.
Yeah, no, people are very nice. I'll see if I can, while we're talking, if I'll remember it. There was a movie made on it. I don't know if I'm going to remember it. I'll look it up while we're busy, and then if I think of it, I'll tell you. Yeah,
now,
it's quite interesting.
You've got a couple of examples of perpetrators that you've counseled who were involved in torturing others, and maybe we can just quickly discuss them before we go into the broader side of torture. And I'm talking about Adrienne. Do you want to just tell us a bit about Adrienne?
Yes, let me tell you a little bit about them. Let me just mention first that you just get an idea of how common this was. And then I'll mention these guys that I spoke to in particular. So, and maybe I must just mention partly why I spoke to them. It might make it also a little easier to understand it. Lorraine, who was the vice chair of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, said that torture was endemic. It was everywhere. It wasn't something that took place somewhere in a handful of prisons. It was virtually in every place they visited. People would say they had been tortured. It was in ambushes, it was in raids, abductions, it was by design. Anyone seen as a threat was at risk. So partly why I spoke to these men was because we were sitting in a very unique situation at that point in South Africa. I mean, as I say, I started picking up people that were talking about it, but the unique situation here was these men had seen themselves almost as heroes. They were doing the dirty work expected by the community. Government expected it, and society expected it. I'm afraid we create the people we have. So when that happens, now everything changes. Suddenly I'm not a hero. Suddenly what I've done is evil. How do I come to terms with it? What do I do? Dave Grossman, he's quite an interesting character. He's a psychologist who does training for the American Army. I don't know if he still does it, he might have retired by now. He wrote a number of books. One was on killing, and another one, I think, is combat. I might be wrong. I think it's combat. And he said that the guy who, if you're going to prepare someone to kill, and very often it comes down to similar things with torture, and many of the, I think every one of these guys that I interviewed had killed numerous times. So for the soldier, or in this case, policeman who was militarized, in order for them to be able to do it, they have to be able to deny the guilt within themselves. They must assure themselves that the world is not mad, that their victims are less than animals, that they are evil, and that what his nation and leaders have told him to do is right. He must believe that not only is the atrocity right, but is proof that he is morally, socially, and culturally superior to those whom he has killed. It's the ultimate act of denial of their humanity. His mental health is invested in it. If that is removed, what do you then have? If I can no longer say I'm a hero, if I can no longer say I'm superior, where do we go from there? So that's where my fascination came in with these people. What actually happens to you? How do you actually make peace with it? So in terms of the people I used that were prepared to do it, I was unbelievably lucky. The research on torture in the world, there have been very, very few people, if any, at that point, I don't think there were any, who were prepared to actually say they'd done it. The work that was done initially with some of the Greek torturers, they allowed quantitative work. They weren't prepared to tell the stories. Some of the work done, I think, I'm speaking under correction now, to South America, it might have been Argentina, might have been, or could have been, yeah, it might have been, I can't remember exactly. They told stories, but they would only tell stories of someone else. They would not own the work. They wouldn't say, I did this. I was very lucky. These men were prepared to tell the story. They were prepared to have me record it, and they took responsibility for it. So the men I worked with were normal, everyday men. I didn't want the ones that were well known. These were the everyday guy who's your neighbor, because they were for me far more interesting than the well-known ones. So Adrian, white Afrikaans man, they were all around 35 to 40, early 40s. White Afrikaans, he is middle class. I met his parents, and it's an absolutely normal, everyday Afrikaans middle class home. He himself is absolutely fascinating. So he was involved in all of this. I will get into a little bit of what he got up to. After that, he was unemployed for a long time. He ended up living on the KZN beaches and illegally fishing for crayfish, which he sold to the restaurants. So he was essentially homeless for a long period. Then his mother got him back to Johannesburg, and she got him a job in some security company. He couldn't get to work. He didn't know how to get to work. He didn't have transport. So he ran to work every day. In total, it was over 20 kilos per day he was running to get to work and home. Yeah, quite a fascinating story. And eventually, some person along the road who'd seen him running said to him, but don't you understand, there's a bus. Now, this particular bus transported black women, and they would hold church services on the bus. And they looked after him. So an absolutely remarkable story. You can imagine what this did to a man who had killed black people, who decided they were evil, and now he was being nurtured by a group of black women.
Wow.
So quite a remarkable story. So that was Adrian. Charles, the first time I met him, he said to me he wants to be medically boarded. In other words, he wants a medical pension. And he said to me, in the second sentence he gave me, he said, I have the following records for torture. He was not underestimating his activities. He tortured extensively. He was getting around 30 arrests a week. To get 30 arrests a week, yes, you are very active. His wife had committed suicide. He was raising 2 children on his own. And a man that was he'd worked in the right units and things, reaction units, for a very, very long time. All these men had been diagnosed with chronic post-traumatic stress disorder. They all had been drinking very heavily. Adrian had stopped drinking a bit before when I saw him, started seeing him. Charles, during the process, stopped at some point. And then David, who's a bit younger. Also a very, very interesting story. And he was sent to Malus Corp for training. Now, Malus Corp was used for counterinsurgency training. They've closed it since then. It was brutal training. I think he is quite sensitive as a person and drank heavily. There were very good reasons why he got into it because of things he'd done. Numerous suicide attempts, numerous hospitalizations, emergency hospitalizations. He tried to kill his family. I had him arrested for that little bit. He still likes me very much, so fortunately it didn't damage our relationship. And the other one, Adrian, had also tried to kill his family on one occasion. So these men had serious problems, and they had presented because what they'd been doing at work had started seeping into their private lives, and they couldn't control it. So that gives you a bit of a background on them.
So what you're saying is that they actually start torturing family members at home and stuff like that.
Well, they wouldn't use those terms for it, but they don't have control. At that point, the drinking obviously had removed control as well. Obviously affected judgment, but they didn't have control. And the symptoms of the PTSD were also out of control. So it's also quite interesting in terms of diagnosis because one can talk about post-traumatic stress disorder, and they had it. I mean, David had been shot. He almost died. In fact, when he describes the symptoms of what he experienced after the shooting, he was pretty close to death. He'd lost so much blood. So yes, developed PTSD. They all had. But they were also responsible for harming other people. So you can't diagnose someone with post-traumatic stress disorder if they've actually done the harming. So there's been some suggestion of perpetration-induced traumatic stress, and a later concept that came in of moral injury, which also works pretty well for this sort of thing.
Right. Now, what I found interesting from a technical perspective is that torture normally involves a government oversight. Now, if we talk about farm attacks and farm murders where for hours they're torturing these farmers on the remote farms, when we were talking earlier, you said that's actually not technically torture because it's not been approved and authorized by the government. Do you want to explain to us the difference there?
Not necessarily even authorized, but done in their name. Because very often it's not officially authorized, but everyone knows what's happening, and a blind eye is turned. So generally torture is done either to get information from someone, it can be done to punish someone, it can be done, those are the basic things, I want to know this and this and this, and so let's give examples. The typical example that's always used. I want to know where this bomb is planted, so I will torture you to get the information to know where the bomb is planted. Okay. Generally, government is not necessarily sponsored, but it sort of fits in with what's accepted. So I'd put it differently. I'd say almost it's what we as a society create. It's the idea of a policeman mustn't have two clean hands. He must do what he needs to do, but we'd rather not know about it. So it fits in with that sort of thing. And obviously we've had regimes, various ones throughout the world, where it has been very obviously government sponsored. Argentina were very clear examples and so forth. But that differs from your farm attack, where it is people acting on their own volition. It's criminal, but so is torture. But they don't have necessarily the same reason for doing it. These definitions blur. So if you look at it, you'll see that they've changed over a period of time. The UN struggled with it as well, and on the Commission for Torture Against Torture, they have been changing the definitions over a number of years, which also says that it's not completely satisfactory. It's not a completely clear thing of this is torture, this is not torture.
Okay. So, getting back to these three examples that you've given us,
Yeah.
what led to them getting involved in torture and killings?
Yeah, when I asked them, it came down to racism, without a doubt, as part of it. Remember, this was now pre-94 in South Africa.
Yeah.
Enacting of masculinity, they also indicated. I'll give some examples now of the words they used. And militarization. The police were militarized in South Africa. And that involves very, very different training to when we're not militarizing the police, when it's a force that's actually there to protect the public. So they used, yes, one good example I've got here. So this was David, and he was talking about the hazing. So with that, it's to teach people to follow irrational commands, not to think about it, just to do it. And how he bought into it. So, and it also gives an idea of the masculinity. That's why I used the quote. He said to me, we had this pitiful wimp with us, really a pitiful wimp. One of these scrawny types. Fuck, he screamed. He trembled. We eventually forced him to become a man. We thought nothing of scrubbing him in the shower, that was with scouring powder, or to hit him with an iron in a pillow while he slept. We taught one another, if you did not fit in, you fucked off. We made you fit in. So you can hear the masculinity there, and the sort of hegemonic masculinity, we have power.
Yeah.
So that comes through very clearly. And here, again, I took this from David because he was quite good on the training part and very descriptive. So he said to me, you know, you would attach a bayonet and would stab dolls and things. And you'd say, die kaffer. Do you understand? I mean, you can say it's just a doll, but in your brain you change it. And I think that in a day I changed from a child into a man, from innocent to murderer. Because when you finished there, you felt dirty. I'm honest, to take a weapon physically and to push it in a direction with a long fucking piece of metal attached, which is sharpened and shines in the sun, and you say die, and I don't know about the others, but I saw someone there in my brain. I saw a body and a person. I placed someone there whom I stabbed. So you can hear the training and what it was doing.
Yeah.
Okay. So quite scary, but again, as I say, militarized, and the message was very, very clear. This is the job we have to do. We have to save South Africa.
Yeah, at any cost.
At any cost.
Now, look, one of the things that I find disturbing, but, you know, it must be the way it is, because you're the expert on this subject, and that is that one of the reasons people torture others is because of the dehumanization of
Correct.
the group that they're targeting. Now, that is the whole basis of a genocide. Now,
Yep.
when we talk about genocides, and we'll be putting a video up shortly on genocides in Rwanda and Armenia, where Rwanda was just shocking beyond belief what happened. I mean, the savage murdering of people there. But you made the point that anybody, under the right circumstances, can participate in something like this. Can you explain that?
Yes, let me give you one example, a very nice one. Look, history tells us this. So, but let me give you one nice historical example. So Browning, I think his name was Christopher, but I'd have to check on that. published a book. It was around late 90s. Reserve Battalion 101. No, Reserve Police Battalion 101. Just as an aside, a lot of the time we get the literature starting, the research happening about 50 years afterwards. By then we can start to face what we've got up to. Anyway, so he published on this unit. He's a historian. And the Nazis did us a favor. They kept good records. So what he did was he went and looked up the records, and this particular Polish village, they mentioned that the commander, I think a commander Major Trapp, had come in the morning looking very distressed and said he had received instructions. The instructions were that these men were too old to call up for the Second World War. And they had instructions. They had to go into the village, which is where their neighbors are, and take the Jews one by one, women, children, disabled, the gypsies, anyone and everyone, and take them one by one into the forest and kill them, and then come back for the second person, and so on. He was, as I say, quite distressed, and he said to them that there won't be retribution. If someone refuses to do it, he understands. Well, the end of the result of that was there were people that refused to do it, and the end of the first day, 1,000 or two were dead. And they gave them alcohol, that's the way we make things better, go to the canteen. And after, I think it's 8 months, they were responsible for thousands and thousands and thousands of deaths, not only in the villages, but also put people on the trains to the death camps. And and what had happened was those who in the beginning had refused to get involved, by the end, were posing for photographs with their trophies.
Oh, no.
Granting these things at the end, if they could do it, anyone could. Let me give you another interesting one. So what happens is with the Nazi war criminals, you got it's a brilliant opportunity for any psychologist. So what they do is, with the Nuremberg trials, they decide, let's do psychological tests. Let's see what we're dealing with here. So they do IQ tests, probably the Wechsler, and they do the Rorschach and whatever. And now we've got the protocol, so now we're going to send it to the leading experts in the world. I think they had about 10 of them, and we're going to ask them to analyze these things and tell us about these people. And these are actually published. I came across the actual protocols. So they send this, and these leading experts in the world, you can imagine, this is wow. Right, they don't get back to them at all. Don't come back with any analysis of any kind. Eventually, a very long time afterwards, the chair of the committee said, we could not, because the problem was, not only were they highly intelligent, there were one or two that were average, the rest all superior IQ, and the problem was they were generally well-adjusted people. And the political, obviously the climate was wrong to hear that the Nazi war criminals were well-adjusted. We didn't want to hear that. Okay, so anyone could do it. Put us in the right position, change our environment, and the chances are we will do it.
Wow. Yeah, because I spoke to a psychologist last week on a live stream, and she made exactly the same point. She said that, if people are put in a certain position, they can do the most evil things, and anybody's capable of doing that. I was blown away by that, because I thought that there were good people and bad people, but it just seems that humanity has got this evil side.
Yes, no, we are people, and people are capable of all these things, and all of us are.
Wow. Now, how common is it for perpetrators to get help for what they've done?
Very uncommon, because it's too difficult. It's partly why I was incredibly lucky. Because to talk about this stuff is extremely, extremely difficult.
Yeah.
how do you talk about it? How do you say, I've done this? Apart from the fact that it's criminal, you may not do it. And remember, when these things happen, the people, the political leaders will disappear. So then it becomes a problem. Who's going to talk about it? You're not going to have your protection. That's gone. In actual fact, I'm just seeing if I can see the one quote. It was quite interesting. Let me just see here where I put it. Because it's extremely difficult to say, I've done this. The one man said to me that it felt to me when he was talking about it, he was actually quite funny, it was Charles, he would be very, very upset while talking. And he said to me one day, it feels like I'm walking completely naked in a shopping mall. And he said, I can't allow myself to know what I've done, because if I know what I've done, how am I going to live with that? And of course, that's true.
Yeah. Wow.
If you allow yourself to recognize what you've done. So remember, other things happen. The things that they experienced happening to them are quite extreme. One of the things that happened is, well, let me give you one or two examples. David at one stage was explaining to me, now this is the development of the PTSD. Now we're talking a man who's masculine, etc., etc., etc. And he says, it's hard to admit it, but I no longer have guts. It's hard to admit I'm afraid because I've become petrified. It was never like that. There was always some respect, fear. One is stupid if you're not afraid to go into a place like that. But it's a controlled fear, and he no longer had that. He was afraid. Adrian said, I went on and on. All the symptoms, I thought I was dying. I had such severe panic attacks. I couldn't drive, especially if there was traffic. I couldn't tell anyone. I had to teach myself to walk. I was totally out of it. I just lay down the whole time and doctored myself, obviously with alcohol at that point. It was frightening. My marriage was destroyed. I felt nothing for anyone. People withdrew from me and I withdrew from them. And for some stupid reason, I was extremely aggressive. A person could not look at me twice and I would knock him out, or he would knock me out, but I didn't care. The complete and utter loss of control.
So these are just normal young men who have been indoctrinated and basically become perpetrators of torture.
Yes, yes.
Ah.
And the trouble is with things like this, Charles was very good at expressing it, but David also told me about it. In Charles' case, he became addicted to it. And that's quite a frightening concept. He couldn't go without it. When he was not torturing, it became a case of his depression would become overwhelmingly bad. And the only way to feel a bit better was to actually go out and harm someone again.
Wow.
There's not much research done on this. Unfortunately, there's a little bit that I've come across. But unfortunately, as I say, it hasn't been followed up very much. You find sort of isolated cases, but I think it's quite a scary concept. And to actually go there and try and actually figure out what is going on here. There was some suggestion, but that's in the 80s, that it's due to an endogenous stress response, that it actually sort of, your body kicks in and releases stress hormones when you're re-experienced to really severe events. So it might be related to something like that, but we don't have enough research on it. But let me give you one example of what Charles, for instance, said to me. You're talking about torture at this point, and he said to me, I don't know. I've often thought about it. For me, it's about the torture became a game. It was as if I was testing fate. You want to see how far you can go, how far you can go, how far you can go. It became a form of release. Later, we didn't lock up many of those we tortured. You tortured him to a point. You got the firearm, you took that and let him go. It was no longer about work. If I must be honest, it was not about let us do the job and get it over with. Get the firearms, get the bag of dacha and hand it in. Why charge the suspect? We'd finished our game. It was fun, it was done with. I was the section leader and influenced things and so on. It was probably wrong of me. Look how many lives I influenced through my actions. How much damage did I do through my actions? I said, talk to him. If he will not talk, I'll take over. And that's it. And then he takes what comes his way. And he actually needed to physically touch the blood. It was part of what released it for him that he could actually function. He said to me, why do I enjoy it so much to see the blood? It's as if you go and you want to touch it. You want to experience it, to feel it. At times you wanted to touch it, my question. You have to sometimes feel it. Otherwise you don't get as much pleasure.
Wow.
Yeah, now that's scary.
That is. Now, what was the impact on you while you were hearing these stories? And, it must have been pretty devastating for you.
The difficulty is you're working with people who are extremely, extremely fragile. So to be able to work with people like this and to actually understand these stories, you can't other them. You can't say he's bad, he's evil. And they'll pick it up immediately. They can read people. I mean, if you're going to torture people, you can read people.
Yeah.
So you have to be genuine, and you have to make an effort to actually understand where he's coming from. There's no way to do it without being aware of your own ability to engage in some or other form of evil. So you have to go there in yourself. Otherwise you can't work with them. So that's part of it. The way I sort of, in one way I did for myself, was to say to myself, it could have been me, but for an accident of birth. Because these things, they were chosen randomly, these men. They didn't choose to go into these positions. They didn't choose to be exposed to what they were exposed.
But you know why I could never become a doctor, Elaine? And that's because when I see blood, not so much my blood, but if I see someone else's blood or I see a video where there's blood, I recoil. I just, I switch off. I've got this thing about blood, and that's why I can't go into a situation where there's someone bleeding, because I'll just become a babbling fool. How can someone like in my situation change to a position where you actually inflict this on people? It just makes no sense.
Habituation does it. So once we're exposed sufficiently, we can do it. So if we want to be more comfortable around blood, we have to be exposed a lot to blood. And eventually it has less and less impact. You can think about it. We all have that experience. Something good happens, and you feel good about it. And as you think about it, over a period of time, it has less and less emotional impact on you. It dissipates. And it's the same with bad things. So if I'm afraid of something, exposure to it will eventually lessen the impact of it on me.
I've heard, just to back up what you're saying, that when it comes to phobias like spiders or things like that,
exposure.
The best thing you can do is actually let a spider walk over your hand. Or
yes, you can do it that way if you want to, if you've got the courage to do it.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you can do it little bit by little bit, which is sometimes a little less brutal.
Yeah.
But essentially, it's the idea of exposure.
Right. Oh, look, the mind is an amazing tool when it's in the right hands. Now, we've talked about 3 cases, which are all, and someone in the side chat actually raised this point, is that all these people are apparently white men. Obviously, it's not just restricted to white men. If we look at what's happening in South Africa today, some of the police, I told you about that situation where I've had first-hand accounts from people who've been put through this, where they are imprisoned, put in a holding cell, and then several really bad black prisoners are then put in the same holding cell, overnight, and they take turns in raping the white guy, and it's called slow puncture. It's apparently something that's not terribly common, but it happens on a regular basis in South Africa. Now, that to me is torture, but you apparently feel that's not really torture, it's just a crime.
I think it's just crime. And it's a people thing. So I worked here with white men. Don't forget, in that period in South Africa, there were very many black people in the police as well. They were also involved in this. Don't forget the ANC was involved in this crap in Angola. These things happen in all these types of organizations. In South Africa, often with the black policemen, they would sort of deliberately not have them in their own areas, because then they could also enact these games. So if you come from a different area where no one knows you, you're not part of the community, it's a lot easier to misbehave.
Right.
Okay. No, this happens. It's certainly not just one group of people, or it happens. You remember the Zimbardo experiments?
No.
All right. So Philip Zimbardo, now there are questions around the work he did. With all these old experiments, there are questions around them. It's the Stanford prison experiment, and there you'll find it under, if you search it, it comes, I think it's under Stanford prison experiment. I think almost that's the URL, but anyway. So this is in the 70s. So Philip Zimbardo at that point is at Stanford, and he's got this bright idea. He's going to create a prison. Now, it's all part of an experiment. Everyone knows he's doing it, because they're busy banging on things in the basement and creating his prison for him. And he says he's going to then get some students in, and he's going to watch their interaction. So he gets his students in, he advertises for them, they do MMPIs and things just to get rid of those that are not too lacquer. And so they've got themselves a reasonably stable group of kids who all students, and they're going to play. Some of them are going to be prisoners, some of them are going to be warders. And the town enacts it. The sheriff says, we're going to arrest the prisoners and bring them to the prison, which they then do. And it's to run over 2 weeks, this whole experiment, and they're going to watch people's interactions. And it was after, I'd have to look it up now, it was about a week, a bit under a week even. Lorianne Perlman, whom he later married, I think, was one of his students, and she came to him and she said to him, they've got to stop this now, because he's treating it like a prison. And what had happened was the warders were busy torturing the prisoners. And so they had to stop it a lot earlier than what they'd planned to do, because they'd actually lost control in the situation, and those who were role-playing being warders were actually harming the prisoners. So those videos are on the internet, and you can go and look at them.
Wow.
And again, it says anyone can do these things. This is not difficult. People do this.
Yeah. Look, I've heard of people being hijacked and kidnapped and being tortured while they're in this other person's control. But to think that this is so easily to become acceptable, that people can actually participate in it. What does that say for South Africa? Because you got someone like Julius Malema running around saying, kill the white, kill the farmer, kill the Boer, and putting these sort of thoughts in the heads of his followers. You've got a situation in South Africa like right now. You've got load shedding, so there's no electricity. Isn't South Africa leading to a perfect storm where this might just get out of control?
We have been incredibly good are getting ourselves to the edge and then getting back from the edge. We hope we get it right again. But we seem to like to live in a little bit of suspense.
So when you talk about the edge, you're talking about anarchy, where basically one group could go and attack another cultural group.
Yeah, it could happen. I doubt very much that it will.
I actually think that most black people are actually really fine, decent people. I think the problem is there's a smaller element who, they're out of control.
You're always going to have politicians saying things that really would be better left unsaid. They're good at this. I mean, we have worldwide issues with this.
Yeah.
Anyone looking at someone like Trump will say, yeah, we've seen this. We've seen it all. So, politicians do these things. So let's accept that's the nature of the breed.
Wow.
Fortunately, I hope most people are sensible enough not to listen to them when they're full of nonsense.
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, Malema does seem to be gaining support amongst the younger people. And
we will watch and see with the next election. Fortunately, next year's coming. Then we'll see.
Yeah. Do you have a positive outlook for South Africa from your perspective?
Long term, yes. I
what
think
about
we'll have
short term?
Because I think we're sitting with a number of problems that are very, very difficult. Will have to be resolved. But long term, yes, I think so.
Yeah. And in the meantime, you just say to people, just buckle in there and just ride it out.
Yes, and I mean, South Africa's different. You go to Europe, you go to the USA and so forth. No one talks to anyone. I'm also glad to get back to South Africa. When I get back and the cashier says to me, have a good day, and we can chat.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter where or who. Everyone talks to each other.
Yeah. Okay. Now,
And that's an African thing.
yeah. Now, you're a psychiatrist. And
Psychologist.
a psychologist, rather. And you've sort of studied this particular area. How can people contact you if they want to perhaps even get your advice on different things? I mean, is there any way people can get you by email or something like that?
They can email me, it's fine. I will answer to that. If they're in South Africa and they want to WhatsApp me, they are welcome to. I don't mind people they don't phone me. If they phone me, I don't answer, but they are welcome to WhatsApp.
Right. Okay. Well, look, after this live stream, perhaps you can drop that information into the Skype, and I'll put your email and your WhatsApp phone number.
That's fine.
below
I'll
the
do
video.
that. That's not a problem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Fantastic. All right. Look, I'm going to wrap up the live stream shortly, but before I do, is there something you would like to say, just as a message for people who are listening to this discussion tonight?
I think the most useful thing with things like this is to know we're all capable of it. It's not someone else who does this. I think it's incredibly useful to know that governments have to be monitored and checked, because it's always tempting to push the limits if you're in government, and that we as civil society have to demand that they behave themselves and not go on the idea that people will automatically do the right thing. I don't think they will. But maybe I'm just a little bit too cynical, but I think especially when we're talking people in positions of power, they have to be monitored.
Yeah, well, you've been very close to the action. Excuse me. So you would have a very good handle on what happens to people under the wrong circumstances.
Yep, and bad things happen very easily.
Yeah. Okay. Well, look, it's been a very different subject, and thank you so much for joining us tonight and sharing with us your area of expertise.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's been interesting. I haven't looked at this stuff for a long time, so that's also been interesting.
Alrighty, take care and have a great evening.
Okay. I'll send you my details quickly.
Okay, fantastic. Bye for now.
Right then.
All right, guys. That was Elaine Bing, and very, very different subject tonight. Yeah. You always learn something, don't you? It's amazing how man is such a brutal animal. It's just crazy. I'm going to go out this time with Hier bly ek boer, and I just wish you all a great evening, and don't forget, tomorrow night, 8 p.m. Johannesburg time, we will have our next live stream, and I'll see you then. Here we go. Hier bly ek boer. And thanks to the mods for looking after the side chat. Bye for now.
Meer as 61,000 van ons voorvaders het op die grens van ons gesterwe, sodat ons vry kan wees. Die is my land, die is my reg. Hier is ek boer. Van is ek gemaak en sal ek terugkeer. Die Bybel is die woord waaruit ek leer, soos die grond op die aarde. Hier bly ek boer. So diep in die nacht sal die vyand kom, maar hier bly ek staan en draai nie om, want jy maak my nie bang nie. Hier bly ek boer. Die is my land waarvoor ek sal veg. Die is my bloed, my zweet, my rug. Die is die plek waar my voorvaders leef. Die is my land, hoor wat ek jou sê. Die is my land, wat my mense voer. Hier bly ek boer. Soos bladam in die somer wat vreugde bring, my opa wat maniekiero kon sing, soos hy stap deur die lande. Hier was hy boer. My wortels lê diep in die grond geplant. My siel soos my pa, los ek vir jou die land, en jy hoef nie te vrees nie. Hier sal jy boer. Die is my land waarvoor ek sal veg. Die is my bloed, my zweet, my rug. Die is die plek waar my voorvaders leef. Die is my land, hoor wat ek jou sê. Die is my land, wat my mense voer. Hier bly ek boer. Die leeuw sal kom, 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 die leeuw sal kom.